Hey everyone, this is Scott from certmedia.com. In this video I'm talking about the rocket loader that's found in Cloudflare. I'm going to be going over how it works, what it is, and why you might be getting flagged for it on page speed insights, which is actually a good thing. So the rocket loader is a free tool found in Cloudflare, and as it mentions, it's supposed to improve your paint time by essentially deferring the loading of JavaScript. So if you have it enabled on your website, you probably came over to your page speed insights and you probably had some sort of warning like, let's see if I could find it. Reduce main thread time, JavaScript execution. There you go. JavaScript execution time. And you probably see Cloudflare static rocketloader.min.js, and you're probably wondering why it's so high. So the rocket loader itself actually doesn't add much to your JavaScript execution time. In fact, many times it'll lower it. The reason you get flagged is because when you enable the rocket loader on your website, it does a couple of things. Number one, any JavaScript that was render blocking is now no longer render blocking. So if I look for jQuery.js on here, for the sake of the video, I have jQuery.js loaded without the defer attribute, and it's not being merged into the rest of my JavaScript, which I can do on my website because I do not need jQuery, as I don't have any inline JavaScript that's dependent on it. However, because I have the rocket loader enabled, I do not get flagged for the render blocking JavaScript warning because it technically is no longer render blocking. This will be pushed until after the onload event time, along with any inline script. So any inline script resource will also be deferred until after the onload event. So for instance, this Genesis menu JavaScript right here is also, because the type attribute's been rewritten, being loaded after the onload event time. The advantage to using the rocket loader on your website comes down to, in many situations, you're not able to defer all JavaScript, particularly jQuery on most WordPress websites. So when you use the rocket loader, it's a very clever workaround by allowing you to simply defer all JavaScript, whether it's inline or from a file, to be loaded after essentially the onload event time and your website's painted. This greatly improves the first paint time because in the largest contentful paint time, because the JavaScript is being pushed until after the onload event time. So your CSS has time to download. It's no longer render blocking in any fashion. So the DOM can be built, and it's overall going to make your website feel snappier. The reason you get flagged for it as your JavaScript execution time has to do with how it works. Essentially, the rocket loader, first of all, it does two things. It adds the rocket loader script, as you can see kind of here at the footer, and in a couple of other places, it's got a weird injection rule, but it doesn't really matter because it'll always inject the same script just in multiple spots. But what it'll do is it'll take your script, so the type attribute, so right here, instead of being text JavaScript, it's script type a random string. So this is a randomly generated string on every page load. So it's unique to the user, so that way it can't be attacked or really injected or anything. It uses a nonce essentially, and it's randomly generated for every user. So if I reload this page, that number is going to change. As we could see, 3584 is now the new number. And this is a good thing. It's supposed to change. But because the browser can't understand what that type attribute is, it effectively skips the entire script. It doesn't know what that is. It says script and then type with the type attribute that is unknown to the browser, it'll just skip past it. In the older implementation, they used to rewrite the type attribute to be a rocket script, which of course also gets bypassed because the rocket script, same exact concept. The browser has no idea what attribute that is or what script this is. So then when you get to the end of the page, it then loads the Cloudflare rocket loader min.js. This is the entire JavaScript library that is added from the rocket loader to do the magic. It's actually fairly small in comparison to, so for instance, here's the WordPress.com stats that comes in Jetpack, which is a very lean stats program in comparison to something like Google Analytics. They're about the same size. This file comes in at around 5 kilobytes or so, which is not much at all. But what it'll do is it'll basically go back through and say, you need to preload these requests and you need to start downloading them. And it works against essentially all mobile devices. It'll work on mobile devices, it'll work on desktop, it'll work with almost every script. The only time I really run into issues with the Rocket Loader is on very Ajax heavy websites, and it's very uncommon on WordPress websites. I've never had a WordPress website where the Rocket Loader caused an immediate issue. However, there are some misconceptions that I want to clear up. Number one, if you get flagged for the reduced JavaScript execution time, and this is directly being flagged from the Rocket Loader script, that is not correct. Because the Rocket Loader script is effectively processing all of the JavaScript on the website, it's going to get flagged in page speed insights. You don't need to worry about that. The way to reduce that JavaScript execution time is simply to remove JavaScript from the pages that it's not necessary on, or to remove the slow loading JavaScript. And the easiest way to figure out which JavaScript is really slowing down the site is to use the JavaScript execution tool, but disable the Rocket Loader so that way it's all being loaded by itself. If you're using something like Auto Optimize, WP Rocket to merge your JavaScript, what you should do in that case is also ignore it or turn it off temporarily. That way you can see each of the scripts individually. You'll tend to notice a pattern that jQuery gets flagged quite often. And that's because a lot of plugins, specifically slider plugins like Revolution Slider, depend on jQuery. And when you have heavy jQuery libraries as well, this can make that time increase quite dramatically. So I wouldn't get too worried if your jQuery time is extremely high, because that's going to be a symptom of a very slow JavaScript library. And you see this the most common with something like Rev Slider. And you'll see jQuery.js has like a 2-second execution time, which is really high, but that's just because of the way that jQuery works. If you turned off Slider Revolution, you would notice that time come down dramatically. So the TLDR is this. The Rocket Loader basically works by deferring all JavaScript, inline, third-party, or otherwise. It works with anything from Google AdSense to analytics to Tag Manager. Some Tag Manager plugins, though, seem to exclude the Rocket Loader from working. I think this is a legacy issue. There were, a few years ago when the Rocket Loader first kind of came out, issues with Google Tag Manager. And there's a very common, popular plugin called Duracell's Tag Manager that does add the data CF async false attribute, so that way it doesn't get affected. However, I haven't had any issues with my stats, and none of my clients ever complain about their analytics or AdSense after using the Rocket Loader. If there was a very symptomatic issue, I'd be alerted of it, but there really isn't. Otherwise, it works great, and you should certainly use it. It will increase your first contentful paint time and your largest contentful paint time. One thing I want to be clear, though, is you can see an increase in LCP if your largest contentful paint item is a slider, which sounds kind of unintuitive, but because the slider could be the largest item on the page, it could yield a slower LCP. Now, if only one page has that, like your home page where it has a large slider, I would still use the Rocket Loader, because you're going to suffer slightly on the LCP of the home page, but you would still see an increase in overall performance on all pages. I hope this kind of clears up some of the misnomers about the Rocket Loader. If you have any specific questions, you can ask in the comments below, but I do highly recommend you use it. It shouldn't really cause you any issues, and it does work with third parties. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.